I knew something was off the second I pulled into my driveway and saw muddy footprints leading from my backyard gate. My name's Yaron Elridge, and I've lived in this neighborhood for 8 years. I'm a mechanic by trade, not a lawyer, but I've got enough common sense to know when someone's crossed a line. And the HOA? They bulldozed right over it. It started 2 weeks ago when I got a notice taped to my door, no envelope, no stamp, just slapped there like some back alley eviction threat. It was from the HOA board, signed by their president, Cheryl Whitmore. Cheryl, the queen of clipped hair and clipboards, has made it her personal mission to micromanage every blade of grass on our street. Her latest complaint: my tool shed, which she claimed was in violation of aesthetic uniformity standards. Except here's the thing, I built that shed in full compliance with the HOA bylaws. I even submitted the paperwork, twice, had the stamped approval to prove it, so I ignored the notice. Figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. That Friday, I came home early from the shop to find my backyard gate wide open. My dog, Duke, was barking like mad from the porch, and when I stepped around the side of the house, I nearly tripped over a broken sprinkler head and 3 sets of muddy boot prints. And there they were, Cheryl and 2 other HOA board members inside my fenced backyard, poking around like they were on a scavenger hunt. Cheryl had a measuring tape in one hand and a walkie-talkie in the other. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough that Cheryl actually jumped. "Oh, Mr. Elridge," she said, recovering fast. "We were just performing a compliance check, standard procedure. In my yard, without telling me." I stepped closer. "This is private property. You don't get to just walk in here." "It's within our rights as the board," Cheryl said, folding her arms like she was standing on a courtroom floor. "We had probable cause to inspect a suspected violation." "Probable cause," I laughed. "You're not cops, Cheryl. You're nosy neighbors with clipboards." One of the other board members, a guy named Bill, who always looked like he regretted every decision he'd ever made, muttered something, but Cheryl cut him off. "We'll be issuing a formal citation for non-compliance," she said. "Expect paperwork Monday." They walked out like they hadn't just trespassed, like they owned the place. I stood there in the wrecked grass, fists clenched, heartbeat in my ears. Then I looked down at the broken sprinkler head, at the muddy boot prints, and finally at the security camera above the shed door, the one they didn't notice. They had no idea I had them all on tape, and I had no idea yet how deep Cheryl's little power trip was about to go. The following morning, I was already up before the sun, pacing the kitchen in my socks with a mug of burnt coffee in hand. Duke sat near the back door, ears twitching every time a squirrel rustled outside. I hadn't slept more than a couple hours. My mind had been busy chewing on everything that happened the day before the trespassing, the damage, the sheer arrogance. I didn't bother guessing whether Cheryl would follow through with her citation. What mattered more was what I had. A time-stamped video from the shed camera showing 3 HOA board members inside my locked backyard without permission, dragging mud across my garden beds and breaking irrigation hardware. I'd pulled the footage off the SD card while Duke was gnawing his breakfast and backed it up on 2 separate drives. By 8, I was at my cousin Simone's office. She's a real estate attorney who usually handles zoning disputes and land use conflicts. She's also the only person I know who can quote municipal code while eating a breakfast burrito. "You're absolutely not overreacting," she said, flipping through the HOA bylaws I'd brought. "This isn't a gray area. They had no legal authority to enter your yard without express permission. And probable cause, that's for law enforcement, not neighborhood busybodies." I leaned forward across her desk. "So what's the play? I'm not just letting this slide." She pulled out her tablet, keyed in a few notes, and tapped the screen. "First, file a police report. Trespassing's a criminal offense. They damaged your property on top of that, which makes it worse. Then we'll draft a cease-and-desist letter, serve it through the court so it carries weight. If they ignore it, we escalate." I squared my shoulders. "Let's escalate. By noon, the paperwork was filed with the local police precinct. The officer who took my report looked surprised not because of what I was reporting, but because I had such clean evidence. I handed over a flash drive with the footage, along with still shots showing Cheryl measuring my shed and Bill stepping directly on the sprinkler head. That same evening, I watched from my front window as a cruiser stopped in front of Cheryl's house. The officer didn't go in guns blazing, this wasn't that kind of town, but he did walk up to her door with purpose. She answered in a pink fleece robe, her expression stiffening the moment she saw the badge. The conversation was short. She gestured, nodded, and shut the door with a tight-lipped expression that probably could have cracked glass. By the next morning, the cease-and-desist papers were drafted and stamped. Simone's assistant filed them with the district court clerk, and I paid extra to have them served formally. Cheryl would be receiving hers directly, no taped notice on the door this time. The other two board members, Bill and a woman named Lorna, were included as co-defendants. They'd all stepped foot past my fence line. Saturday arrived with an unexpected twist. I was replacing the broken sprinkler when a man approached from the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, wearing a collared shirt with a city council seal embroidered near the breast pocket. "You Yaron Elridge?" he asked. "That's me." "I'm Councilman DeLeon," he said, offering a hand. "Got wind of your situation through the precinct, thought I'd swing by in person." I wiped my hands on my jeans and shook his hand. "Appreciate that. I didn't realize this was on your radar." "Normally, it wouldn't be," he said, "but this HOA's had complaints before, mostly buried, nothing stuck. But this is the first time we've seen someone come forward with actual evidence. Concrete stuff. That makes a difference." He nodded toward my camouflaged shed camera. "Mind if I take a look at the footage?" he asked. "Already saved and submitted," I said. "But I'll burn you a copy." He gave a sharp nod. "I'm not promising fireworks tomorrow, but I can tell you this. If they've been playing fast and loose with authority, there's gonna be some accountability coming their way." By Monday, things got ugly, just not for me. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Normally, those are held in the clubhouse down by the community pool, but this one was invitation only. No public notice, no agenda posted, just a couple of cars parked out front and hushed whispers behind drawn blinds. What they didn't know was that my neighbor, Tessa, worked part-time cleaning the clubhouse. She texted me later that night, describing a frantic scene: Cheryl pacing, Bill fiddling with his pen like it might explode, and Lorna demanding they lawyer up. Someone had mentioned my name loudly. Tessa said the words civil liability and malicious conduct got tossed around more than once. The following day, I was served by them. A notice of fine for unauthorized structure modification and failure to comply with board directives. They'd stapled 3 grainy photos of my shed to the back of the notice, as if that would somehow erase the fact that they'd already approved it. The cherry on top, a $500 fine. I brought the notice straight to Simone. "They're retaliating," she said without even blinking, "which is great for us. This helps prove a pattern." She added the fine notice to the court file and flagged it under retaliatory action. We also filed an injunction to prevent further harassment until the case concluded. 2 days later, the court date was set. Small claims for now, but it was enough to get everyone's attention. The day of the hearing, Simone and I walked into the courtroom together. Cheryl and her entourage were already seated, Lorna staring holes into her notepad, Bill looking like he might throw up, and Cheryl wearing a blazer 2 sizes too stiff. The judge, a tall woman with silver hair and a voice like gravel, glanced over the paperwork, then raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me," she said, addressing Cheryl directly, "that you entered this man's backyard based on your own authority without notice, and then issued a punitive fine after he filed a police report against you?" Cheryl opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "We believed we were within our rights," she said finally. "Belief is not the same as legality," the judge replied, flipping through the evidence file. And based on the footage provided, your actions were not only unauthorized but deliberate. I'm issuing a temporary restraining order preventing you from setting foot on the plaintiff's property. You will also cease all fines or citations until this matter is resolved." Cheryl's face went pale, then the judge turned to me. "Mr. Elridge, if you wish to file a separate civil suit for damages or emotional distress, you may do so. Based on this documentation, I'd say you have a strong case." I nodded. "I'll be following up." As we left the courtroom, Cheryl tried to intercept me in the hallway. She took a step forward, but Simone was faster. "Don't," Simone said, holding up a hand. "Anything you say now can be used later." Cheryl's jaw twitched. She turned away without a word. Back in the parking lot, I took a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The weight of it all hadn't hit me until that moment, but this wasn't over. Cheryl and her crew weren't the type to back down quietly. The difference now, I had the law on my side, and they had a court file with their names on it. That was the first domino. The rest were already wobbling. 3 days after the hearing, a plain manila envelope arrived in my mailbox. No postage, no return address, just my name, misspelled in all caps, scrawled across the front like a ransom note. Inside were 6 blurry photographs of my backyard from different angles, each marked with red Sharpie circles and arrows pointing at random items. A garden hose, the compost bin, even Duke's water bowl. No note, no explanation, just the photos. I stood there at my kitchen counter, envelope in one hand, photos sprawled out like some bizarre surveillance exhibit, and for the first time I felt something colder than anger. This wasn't just HOA overreach anymore. This was targeted, deliberate, an attempt to intimidate. I took the photos to Simone that afternoon. She examined them one by one, her expression unreadable. "They're trying to establish a pattern," she said. "They want to make it look like your property's a magnet for code violations, but the fact that they didn't send this through any official channel. That's harassment." "I don't think they're just trying to document things," I said. "Someone stood behind my fence to take these. They're not from the street, they're from inside my property line." Simone tapped her pen on the desk. "Then we're upgrading this. I'll notify the judge handling the injunction. With the restraining order in place, unauthorized entry becomes contempt of court." "Do we press charges?" She looked up. "We're going to do more than that." That night, I installed 2 additional motion-activated cameras. One facing the side yard, the other mounted under the eaves above the back fence. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed proof. Whatever Cheryl and her board were planning, they didn't realize I was already 2 steps ahead. The following morning, the cameras paid off. At exactly 4:22 a.m., someone scaled the back fence. The footage showed a figure in a dark hoodie, carrying a flashlight and what looked like a clipboard. They crept along the fence line, paused behind the shed, then crouched near the compost bin exactly where one of the photographs had been taken. I watched the footage 3 times before calling Simone. "You need to get that to the police immediately," she said. "That's criminal trespass, violation of a restraining order, and possible stalking." I drove straight to the precinct and handed over the footage. The officer who took the report recognized me from the earlier case. After reviewing the video, he called in a detective. Detective Helen Krantz didn't waste time. She studied the footage, then asked, "Any idea who this is?" "Not yet," I said, "but I've got a guess." "You think it's someone from the HOA, not someone, Cheryl, or someone she sent?" The detective nodded slowly. "We'll pull prints from the fence and shed if we can. You've already got a restraining order, so if we can match this to anyone named on it, that's a straight felony." By the end of the week, 2 things happened almost simultaneously. First, Cheryl received a formal notice from the county prosecutor's office informing her that she was the subject of an active investigation into criminal trespass and violation of a court order. Second, a local news crew showed up at my door. Apparently, someone from the precinct leaked the story anonymous homeowner files cease and desist against HOA board, then catches them trespassing again on camera. The story had legs, and once the news got hold of it, the whole neighborhood knew. I agreed to a short interview on the condition that Duke could sit beside me. He kept things grounded. The reporter asked questions about the footage, the court case, and how it felt to go up against the HOA. I didn't want a war, I said. I just wanted them to respect the same rules they expect everyone else to follow. The segment aired that night. The next morning, I couldn't go for coffee without someone honking in support or stopping me to say they were rooting for me, but not everyone was thrilled. Bill showed up on my doorstep just before noon, holding his car keys like he didn't know what to do with them. I didn't know, he said before I could speak. About the photos, about the fence. Cheryl never told us she was still doing anything. You were there in my yard, I said. You knew exactly how far she was willing to go. I thought we were within bounds, he said. She told us we had new authority under the bylaws. That we could do inspections without notice if we had majority consent from the board. And you didn't think to check if that was true, he looked down at the gravel. I'm stepping down. From the board, Lorna too, I think. We don't want any part of this anymore. I said nothing. Let him sit with that silence. When he left, I called Simone. If 2 board members resign, what happens? The board can't function with less than a quorum, she said. They'll have to hold a special election. And given the publicity, I'd say their candidate pool just shrank dramatically. By the next week, Cheryl was the only active member left. Lorna's resignation came through via email to the HOA's general inbox, which someone anonymously forwarded to Simone. Bills came the day before, typed, signed, and scanned, but Cheryl didn't back down. Not yet. Instead, she mailed every homeowner in the neighborhood a flyer, a single-page manifesto printed in red ink, claiming she was being persecuted by radical elements, and that the integrity of the neighborhood was under attack. She accused me of staging the footage, manipulating public opinion, and weaponizing the legal system. It was unhinged. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Detective Krantz called 2 days later. We identified the person from your camera footage, she said. It's an off-duty property inspector who works freelance. He's done private work for Cheryl before. Is he being charged? We're bringing him in for questioning. But here's the interesting part. He says he was paid in cash, no contract, and told to document violations discreetly. And let me guess, he thought that meant trespassing? Apparently so. We've already subpoenaed Cheryl's financial records. If she paid him with HOA funds, that's misappropriation. If she paid him out of pocket, she still authorized an illegal entry. That was the tipping point. A week later, the county prosecutor filed formal charges: criminal trespass, violation of a court order, and illegal surveillance. Additionally, the inspector was charged as an accomplice, but agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. His statement placed Cheryl at the center of the plan. The prosecutor also filed a motion to audit the HOA's financials going back 5 years. Allegations of embezzlement followed, and suddenly, neighbors who had kept their heads down were knocking on Simone's office door with their own stories: mysterious fines, denied repair reimbursements, missing dues. The special election was held under court supervision. I didn't run, but I did endorse a slate of candidates who promised transparency, fair enforcement, and community involvement. They won by a landslide. Cheryl was removed from the board by judicial order. Her trial date was set, and she was banned from holding any position in the HOA for life. The judge also ordered restitution for the damage to my property and legal fees. When it was over, I stood in my backyard, now quiet, safe, and mine again, and watched Duke chase a squirrel across the lawn. The shed stood exactly where it had always been, untouched and lawful. Justice hadn't come quickly, but it had come hard, and this time, the only thing Cheryl Whitmore could micromanage was her own defense. It was early spring by the time the audit team arrived. 3 quiet professionals from the county's compliance office who showed up in a city-issued sedan and walked into the HOA's office with clipboards and sealed envelopes. Cheryl had been suspended by then, but the office still bore traces of her reign. Motivational posters with passive-aggressive slogans, a whiteboard calendar with her name scribbled across nearly every other day, and a locked cabinet that took the auditors exactly 20 minutes to request a warrant for. I was at home installing a new siding panel when I got the call from Simone. "They found something," she said, "and it's worse than we thought." I leaned against the porch rail. "How bad?" "There's evidence of unauthorized withdrawals, thousands over the past 4 years. Some of it went to personal expenses that have nothing to do with HOA operations. It's fraud, Yaron, straight-up felony level." The next day, a detective and 2 uniformed officers arrived at Cheryl's home with a search warrant. I didn't see it happen, but Tessa did. She called me from across the street 5 minutes after they rolled up. She didn't argue, just stood there in the doorway like someone had unplugged her, she said. They walked her out in cuffs. The charges included embezzlement, falsifying records, and obstruction. The county added wire fraud after discovering she'd rerouted certain payments through a private PayPal account under the name Whitmore Community Services, an entity that didn't exist beyond a P.O. box in the next town over. I didn't celebrate. Not really. Not when the damage was still rippling outward. Over 24 residents were impacted by the phantom fines and fraudulent charges, some of whom had already refinanced homes or sold under pressure. The new board, still fresh in their roles, was scrambling to make restitution. Simone had been hired as their legal consultant. I was at the garage when she dropped by one afternoon with a folder in hand. "The board wants to offer you a formal apology," she said. "Not just for what happened to you, but for what your case exposed. They're also voting to rename the HOA. Rename? They want to distance the organization from everything Cheryl did," she said. "The name's tainted. No one wants to live under the Whitmore Association anymore." I took the folder and skimmed the letter inside. It was simple, direct, and signed by all 5 new board members. It acknowledged the violations of my rights, the damage to my home, and the retaliatory behavior I endured. They also enclosed a check for the full cost of repairs, legal fees, and an additional settlement authorized by the board. "You accepting it?" Simone asked. "Yeah," I said, "but I want one thing added." She raised an eyebrow. "The cameras I installed, they stay. No future board gets to tell anyone to take down private security equipment on their own property. I'll make sure it's written into the bylaws." The trial began in late May. Cheryl arrived with a private attorney rumored to cost more than she'd ever legally earned through the HOA. The courtroom was packed with residents, local reporters, and even a few former board members who had once backed her decisions. None of them sat near her. The prosecution laid out a detailed timeline of her actions: unauthorized inspections, fake citations, misuse of HOA funds to hire private contractors, and attempts to intimidate residents into silence. They showed bank records, video footage, and even a series of emails where she explicitly told an assistant to create enough pressure that the Elridge case goes away. Cheryl took the stand on the 3rd day. Her attorney tried to paint her as overwhelmed, overworked, and misunderstood. I watched silently from the gallery as she tried to play the martyr, claiming she only wanted to preserve the value of the neighborhood and that sometimes difficult decisions were necessary. Then the prosecution played the footage from my backyard, the one where she measured my shed like it was a crime scene. The room fell silent. By the end of the week, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in state prison, with parole eligibility after 2. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the HOA and individual residents, barred from holding any administrative or financial role in any organization for 10 years, and required to complete a financial ethics course before release. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. Some cheered when the verdict was announced. Others just stood quietly, relieved. I didn't stick around. Instead, I went home, took Duke out on the porch, and watched the sun go down behind the shed they tried so hard to tear down. The yard was still, the grass even, the cameras blinking quietly above the eaves. Tessa came by later with a bottle of cider and 2 mismatched mugs. "Feels like a new chapter," she said, sitting on the steps. "Yeah," I said. Without the footnotes. We didn't talk about Cheryl or the trial or the years of petty fines and manufactured rules. We just watched the neighborhood settle into something it hadn't been in a long time, peaceful. The new board held their first open meeting the following weekend. They invited every resident and held it outside, under the old oak near the mailboxes. No clipboards, no closed doors. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My story was already written in the new policies, the cleaned-up books, and the cameras mounted on 6 homes now installed not in fear, but in quiet solidarity. The HOA had tried to turn my yard into a battleground. I turned it into a landmark.